On a recent episode of Podcraft, I talked about ways to sell niche indie podcasts to potential sponsors. And now we're going to look at how to track the impact and effectiveness of those sponsorships once they're set up. So if you think about the way most podcasts are consumed, they're listened to on the go and away from the screen. And this makes it challenging to track the folks who've decided to check out your sponsors. The listener might hear your ad while walking the dog, driving to work, or doing the dishes. The action often happens later, maybe hours or even days later, and by then the trail could be pretty hard to follow. And yet advertising on podcasts is massively effective. A 2023 Spanish listener survey by Acast revealed that 97% of listeners have a positive perception of brands advertised on podcasts. And last year, I remember Tom Webster at Sounds Profitable sharing data on how 86% of ad-supported podcast listeners recalled seeing or hearing an advert in the past week. But how do you and your partners know that your sponsorship efforts are working? Maybe the company saw an increase in sales or sign-ups after your episode went live, but who's to say that that isn't just a coincidence? And even if it did come from podcast advertising, what if this company sponsors multiple shows? At that point, figuring out what actually moved the needle can get a bit murky. Now, I'm not going to claim that there's a bulletproof way to fix this, but there are 4 easy ways that are going to help you build a pretty accurate picture of your show's sponsorship impact. I've wrapped them up in a highly questionable acronym, CLAP. So what do I mean by CLAP? Well, the C stands for codes. And here, anyone who sells stuff, whether that's coaching and courses or books and physical products, they could simply create a discount code relevant to the show that they're sponsoring. For example, use coupon code PODCRAFT10 to save 10% at checkout. And if your sponsor doesn't want to discount their prices, they could set up this code to incentivize something extra instead. For example, maybe there's a bonus resource that they could add to their offering. The bottom line is that these codes are highly trackable. With them, you'll know exactly how many people took action on the ad and exactly where they came from. So L is for landing pages. And here your sponsor might create a special landing page for listeners of the podcast and give it a memorable URL. Or they could make that memorable URL as a redirect link using a tool like Pretty Links and point it to their main landing page. This might look something like yoursponsor.com/podcraft. It's easy to read out and it's easy to remember. And whether it's a dedicated landing page or a simple redirect link, the point is that you could track metrics and get a decent gauge of the ad's effectiveness. Of course, not all listeners are going to take the time to type in these special links, so here's another option. A is for attribution polls. Sometimes listeners hear an ad on a podcast, but they can't really act on it right away. And later on, they might search for the product or service on Google, but any attribution to the podcaster at that point seems lost. But if your sponsor has a "How did you hear about us" poll on their website or checkout, credit could still be assigned, and that gives you another wee piece of the puzzle here. Alright, finally, the P is for parameters, or UTMs. So UTM stands for, believe it or not, Urchin Tracking Model. So that means you really can enlist the help of urchins without becoming a Dickensian sweatshop owner. With podcast sponsorship, you're not totally reliant on folks hearing a link being read out. All links in the show notes is a common phrase amongst us podcasters. So when someone sponsors your podcast, use a UTM link in the accompanying show notes and blog posts. You could easily make UTM links for free using Google's Campaign URL Builder tool. I'll put a link in the show notes to that, and I'll maybe even go super meta and make it a UTM link. UTMs look like sprawling gibberish. If you were to read one out, it would sound something like https://www.alitu.com?UTM_source equals the podcast host, &UTM_medium equals blog, &UTM_campaign equals podcast editing tips. Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? But yeah, obviously they're designed for clicks, not lips, and you could get much more nuanced with these across multiple different pages and posts than you could with a simple short link. You could have a different UTM link in the intro of the piece, and then a different one in the summary call to action, and so on and so forth. But that's really it. That is the CLAP framework. We've got codes, landing pages, attribution polls, and parameters, or UTMs. If you're happy and you know it, clap your brand. Thanks for listening to this episode of Podcraft, and I hope it's been useful in helping you develop your podcast sponsorship systems. As ever, Podcraft is brought to you by Alitu, not just the easiest and best way to edit a podcast, but an all-in-one platform, enabling you to record and publish your show in there too. Check it out for a 7-day free trial at alitu.com, that's alitu.com.